Hi guys, it's Plan B here, and today we are interviewing Comrade Haas from the United States. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm a basically YouTuber and streamer living in the United States, and I have begun alongside 10 other of my colleagues what we call the Infrared Project. And the goal of the Infrared Project is to promote the study of Marxism-Leninism in the age of multipolarity. We have taken a rather heterodox approach to the promotion of the study because we believe that there has been a fundamental mistranslation of the experience of Marxism-Leninism in the actually existing socialist states to the Western context. We believe that in the Western countries, communism has been a complete failure, and we want to get to the reason of why that is.
In some of your videos, you stated and tried to prove that Donald Trump and all the movement around him is not just some far-right moronic nonsense, but a popular movement with some progressive tendencies. Could you please provide us with some nuance of your position?
We think that in America, at least, and this could possibly be true for other Western countries under America's influence, there has been a political realignment. And traditionally, what is considered the left has somehow become completely absorbed by the imperialist hegemony. And curiously, from the right side, there has emerged some kind of ambiguous anti-hegemonic stance, populistic and so on. Of course, we don't agree with it on an ideological level. On the superficial level, we, of course, reject the anti-communism and foolish beliefs of the right. But in terms of their position, there has somehow from there emerged an objectively anti-imperialist stance. So Maga communism is an attempt to draw a conclusion from this fact, which is that communists must build a new hegemony outside of the institutions of, not to ramble, but the Italian theorist Antonio Gramsci had theorized the need for communists to acquire the hegemony. And many have been doing this since the end of the Second World War with a long march through the institutions, the universities, the academies, the establishment, the Democratic Party, and so on and so forth. We believe that this has led to, partially at least, neutralization of any revolutionary substance among the left. So our view is that they have drawn the wrong conclusion from Gramsci. We have to build the hegemony outside of the institutions. We must build the new institutions outside of the hegemony. And the only way to do that is to build them from the rural strata, the people left behind, the Trump people, the Maga people. And it's our analysis that Maga in America represents just very vaguely and ambiguously the other America. So there's the official America of the institution, the American government and so on. And then there's the other America, the America of the rural people and the people outside of the institutions. They're not covered by the media, politically incorrect, and so on and so forth.
With all that political correctness nonsense, which is, by the way, historically a bad reading of, Soviet political text, but anyway. With all that nonsense, we firmly believe that no true working class movement can actually fit this agenda anyways. Why? Because, this political correctness is too uniform and too formalized in one hand, and too hard to follow all those, waves of what is correct and what is not. It's good for, students and members of the academia, but it would never work for the working class, actually. So yeah, I think we are pretty much on a very similar position with you in this case.
This political correctness, in my view, represents the complete, bourgeoisification of culture, because the bourgeoisie is a class of standardization. There's a big misconception that socialism was unique for the way it created a standardized society of complete equality, but that's not what distinguishes distinguished the Soviet socialism. What distinguished the Soviet socialism was the kolkhozes that were established, which in fact created a non-standard version of rational economic planning, where not everything was owned by the state. There was some owned by the collective farms and the civil society. It's the bourgeoisie that aspires toward completely rationalizing, standardizing, and leveling everything.
Any kind of transnational corporation is just that.
Exactly.
A huge standard applied to the entire world, regardless of the nuance and whatnot. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just, basic dialectics. You cannot build a truly uniform society without addressing those nuances and without allowing them to develop on their own. Basically.
Particularity.
And speaking of basically the vague movements of the modern age that are Maga in the US, and to an extent Donetsk liberation movement in our context, which was actually fairly interesting because it just lacked traditional left and right divisions, basically. We had communists and nationalists on both sides, actually, of that conflict.
Yeah, there's, not to interrupt, but very briefly, I have written a Substack, which I consider a political theory, and it's my view that what has happened is that because of the end of political modernity, which begins in the French Revolution, the left and the right, the division now is between partisanship, drawing from the Carl Schmitt idea of the partisan. There's the political force of the partisan, and then there is the hegemony, the traditional standardization of politics. And the partisan represents a non-standard position of political power, basically, is my interpretation of Schmitt. So why it is in Donetsk you have this phenomena which evades the traditional left-right distinction is because it's quite literally outside of the standard political spectrum. It's grounded in the particularity of a people and a situation, for example, that just makes it partisan.
I mean, from the more generalized Marxist perspective, they're basically faced with some brutal realities of their existing, some cultural and national oppression, the economic policies that won't fit their region like at all, those EU deals and whatnot. That wouldn't work for them. And a lot of people who were then and there could realize that regardless of their political views and ideologies and whatnot. Yeah, so on the other hand, we had a pro-hegemony side of things, and I mean, I know a few Russian far rights that went to Ukraine to fight against Donetsk rebellion, and I know a few leftist organizations in Russia who support actually Ukraine in this conflict. So we believe that their interests are just aligned with that global hegemony.
Precisely.
Regardless of what they're stating on their slogans and banners.
Precisely. I think if we are Marxists, then we should also apply materialism to politics. Politics is not just about the stated ideology. It's about the objective material position entailed.
Continuing on this topic of movements, what do you think could be a good productive relationship between communist political ideology and the religion?
That's an interesting question. So I believe that there has been a mistake as far as dating back to Marx, as far as the communist understanding of religion. And that probably is one of my major heresies from traditional Marxism. But to explain, when Marx critiqued religion, he was doing so from the perspective of the philosophical critique of religion that was coming from the German idealism, right? The conclusion of Hegelianism was this understanding of religion that philosophy was supposedly superior to, right? There was the enlightenment of the philosophers. So the question that everyone was trying to deal with was, is why, nonetheless, do people still have these silly religious beliefs after we have become rationally enlightened by philosophy? And Marx's conclusion, well, the understanding they all came to is that religion is about the feeling. It's a sensuous relation, right, to the world. It's not based on the rationality. It's based on the inner feeling. And Marx's conclusion was that religious belief, and he called it religious alienation, was a product of something about the world, not about a philosophical misunderstanding. Meaning, religious believers were not wrong philosophically or scientifically. It stemmed from a real relationship they had to the world. And I think this understanding of religion just as a form of alienation, I think has also not fully separated religion from philosophy. To me, religion is deeper than a specific, let's say, statement about whether something exists in the sky or whether miracles happen. It's not just superstition. I think religion refers to the deep texture of unconscious morals and norms and behaviors and so on that it's clear to me even communists took for granted. However severe the communist criticism of religion, it seems like there was a biblical unconscious that regulated their commitment to the communist ideology. And I think that was taken for granted to a great extent. I don't believe communists should have unquestioning loyalty to religious institutions, but we should try to understand and cultivate a deeper sense of what religion is than Marx was able to. That's one of my positions. I think here we are dealing with a situation where religion is being successfully replaced with this terrifying bourgeois nihilism, both in the West and the world over. And we should really try and understand the deeper connection between communism and religion as a response to this.
What can I say? Bismillah.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay, let me. It's relevant. Okay, let's then go back to your traditional left and right in the US, which I actually, could you please explain the mainstream traditional left and right divisions in the US, because they seem way different from even Europe, let alone Russia.
Well, right now, they seem to be breaking down at rapid speed. So even as of the upcoming 2024 election, I can't say if it can really be intelligible anymore. It's starting to lose clarity as far as what it means. Because traditional right-wing forces are now joining the old left ones and vice versa. So a different polarization is taking shape. But I can vaguely say that traditionally, the American left has been associated with a cultural position of eradication and breakdown of norms, and especially and even primarily in the sphere of sexuality and traditions. And the left, let's say of the past decade, because before you're talking about a defeated left, right? Before the 2010s, there was no real left to speak of. It was defeated because of the dissolution of the USSR and so on. But it's what's being called the wokeism, right? And it's this reflexive kind of position which states that society is fundamentally unjust or wrong, and we need to participate in this kind of social movement to address the injustice by means of culture, right? So it's the Black Lives Matter, it's the LGBT stuff, it's the feminism, it's the abortion stuff, and it's not specifically an ideology, it's not specifically a movement. I would probably call it a kind of technology, the wokeism. The wokeism is a result of the information era, the internet, because the ability to propagate information and communicate on a scale of society has become possible. The distinction between the local and the universal has broken down. So before, for example, there was a sense of separation, but now the eyes of the world are on everyone, everywhere, right? So your local bar, for example, your local whatever, there's always a camera, there's always a communication going on. interfacing with this kind of internet, this network, right?
Yeah,
and the wokeism, the wokeism is this kind of universal surveillance of whatever the hegemony is. It's not even so radical or revolutionary. Like, for example, the basic anti-racist position has been the norm since civil rights here in the United States. And most people probably think that it's wrong to discriminate against others for their sexuality and so on. But the way in which these moral positions have been weaponized structurally because of the technology, that's what the wokeism is. It's a kind of way of filtering human interactions in reality through this kind of universal discourse. So to get to the point, right now it seems like that is what the left is. The left is this kind of universal discourse, and the right is various vain and failed forms of resisting that. But that's just kind of ideological terms. In practical terms, you have a situation where the left is defined by alignment with institutions, right? And the right is also, I'm speaking in material terms, defined by some kind of questioning, resistance, and opposition to institutions. And whether that is still left or right anymore is what needs to be called into question. But that is the primary axis of polarization that exists in America right now.
From that perspective, modern American right can seem way more left in traditional sense than modern American left.
Taken as a whole, yes. But in their particularities, they're just veiled forms of resistance. See, the thing is that capitalism, let's call it, or the bourgeois hegemony, is defined by the homogeneity, right? Complete standardization and homogeneity of the society. This is the basic standard for the capital, right? Also, the homogeneity of norms and fashions and ideologies and thoughts and so on and so forth. So what you're dealing with is the institutions trying to homogenize, I don't know how to say, the very foundation and fabric of human civilization, the unwritten, implicit, unconscious regulations, norms, and laws governing the interaction between people. Like Lenin, for example, in the State and Revolution, he said, when there is no longer any police, how will bad behavior be regulated? And he said, well, it's just the basic norms of civilization that have existed for thousands of years. Just like when someone accosts a woman on the street and everyone rushes in to help her, just instinctually, right? Lenin here was referring to the deep texture of unconscious, unwritten norms and mores of the civilization. But we have gotten to the most barbaric stage of the capitalism where even this now is being called into question. Our basic foundation, unconscious kind of humanity, they are trying to make it completely explicit and completely subjected to the rules of the politically correct institutions, corporations, and so on and so forth.
And monetize it in process.
Precisely, yes, of course. Yeah.
I mean, that's all they can do anyways. And well, doesn't it sound the most totalitarian thing ever?
It is, precisely is, yes.
I love those, paradoxes of liberalism when, liberal call for freedom is the most totalitarian thing in the world, actually.
Yes, it is. Because there's no more room for any spontaneity. Like, you are already somehow, your spontaneous, innocent behavior is now being coded morally or politically. Like, you accidentally misgender someone. Oh, I called them she. Oh, no, it's they. It said, I was innocent, You're guilty, not guilty, right?
Well, it is kind of terrifying in one hand, but in the other, human society learns to adapt, but I think when there is a limit to an adaptation, there comes the resistance, basically.
Precisely. This is the confusion, because traditionally Marxists said the latest trend is the progressive one. We can't be reactionary. But what they don't see is that we are facing the annihilation of humanity itself. The basic ability to have the minimum of privacy, right? To distinguish our conscious social obligations from our private, ambiguous reality is being eliminated. And that is not something that can lend itself to the reproduction of the human species. It will lead to basically, I mean, it's practical consequences on a very basic level for the ability to begin families and engage in biological reproduction, right? I mean, people are not having children anymore.
If you can harass a woman just by making a compliment, I mean, it's kind of scary to start.
Yeah, it's a complete breakdown of the ability for the sexes to interact, man and woman, even. You know, there's everything is governed by some kind of explicit rules, like standard rules, and it basically means there's no longer any ability to really recognize any particular humanity, because humanity is about being able to, if you read Marx and so on, recognize the otherness, right? Is really an other, really someone you don't know, really someone ambiguous, potentially politically incorrect, and there's no way to kind of live with that ambiguity. Someone is either in, politically correct, safe, and completely compatible, or they're out, politically incorrect, they're fascist, they're Nazi, they're whatever. And of course, they're not Nazis, but these are the labels being used to describe.
What makes me laugh, this, formula politically correct and politically incorrect. Well, I mean, it was invented by the Soviet communist media in, I believe, in the late 20s, and it was a way to express basically critique for journalists not understanding the political moment and writing stuff that can be misunderstood by the population. So that was what was politically correct to state or politically incorrect to state.
Not, in that case, it was a failure to articulate the political line, not a failure to be human being.
Yes, that's it. And I mean, now they just turn it, inside out and upside down, and thoughts of seizing the Communist Party of the USA. So basically, what's the idea there?
The idea is that Western communism has been defined by sectarianism exclusively. And I think some of that has to do with this kind of individualism, which doesn't allow for an understanding that the form of the party and your own principles and beliefs and thoughts and opinions are totally different things. So the idea was that we should join the CPUSA, even though we disagree with the prevailing line, because it is the historical Communist Party. And to make another Communist Party solely based on our line, which can be changed, right? So that's just a recipe for more splits, more sectarianism. So the idea was we should take over the CPUSA by being more faithful to the party than to our own individual viewpoints, and thereby, by leading with example, taking over the party. But the problem, of course, has been that the leaders of the CPUSA don't even respect their own party protocols or the party itself. They, for example, because of what we did, they've delayed elections by 2 years for the leadership. They're engaging in all manner of arbitrary it's total chaos. So I think there are some problems with the traditional party structure. And to remedy this, I have plans on unveiling a new kind of, not party, but it's difficult to express, but a different form of the CPUSA, by the use of technology, especially information technology. Many of the issues of the party form can be reduced to issues of technology. How to, for example, authenticate membership, how to validate actions you deem acceptable or unacceptable. Parties are mainly about filtering people, right?
Well, and enforcing the line, I would say.
It's precisely. And I think with the emergence of some of these new especially information technology should have been the most important, but also the blockchain technologies and so on and so forth, there are now ways to think about how to maybe not make a new party, but deploy methods of party party activity unconventionally. So the idea is that we will seize upon the use of technology to give CPUSA attention and significance and prominence, basically seizing hegemony over the party by means of technology. So we will take over the party basically because we will use more advanced technology to make the party more relevant, significant, and notable than it is now. So that's currently the plan, because we've tried to obey the democratic centralism and so on and so forth, but they have kind of decided that, one, they're just going to start removing and banning any discussion whatsoever of anyone who happens to be sympathetic to my views. And then secondly, they are the final nail was they were delaying elections by years and years. And then also scandals. There's talk that there's some corruption going on at the top when it comes to party funds and money and so on. So we think it's appropriate to now just lay hold and claim of the party with or without the current leadership.
Nice.
Basically, we will steal their brand, basically, and be the party we want. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, what you said about CPUSA sounds painfully familiar to me. I was a member of one of alternative communist parties in Russia, and yeah, it was pretty much the same. Yeah. Let's then talk about your opinions on some organizations outside the United States, and we'll start with our favorite one. Why do you think, if so, that CPRF is still a communist party, despite, and I'll quote, its opportunistic and revisionist, and it gave its victory in the 90s to the bourgeoisie, and a whole another list of accusations.
I don't think the credibility of a communist party is only necessarily based on the perceived correct or incorrect actions of the leadership. I think part of, historically, being a part of a communist party means respecting and obeying the form of the party while disagreeing with the current line and basically those governing it. The difference, I think, with the CPUSA, which I think is crucial, is that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation commands the loyalty of a very significant portion of the masses and of the Russian working class relative to other organizations.
Well, so, yeah, it's eternal second on the elections.
Precisely, yeah. But it's also, we can agree, relatively popular among the elderly, and as an institution probably has done more than any other organization to defend the legacy of communism within the Russian context on a cultural and ideological level. Despite
sometimes even on a practical, unfortunately, they are doing less and less of that lately. I mean, well, they were proposing right stuff, right amendments to the labor code and whatnot, but unfortunately, well, while the party leadership gets older and older, they are less and less active in this regard.
No, I can see that. It's an inevitable phenomenon as a result of the generational. But as far as young communists in Russia, I don't live in Russia, so you have to take my word with a grain of salt. But I think if I were living in Russia right now and I was a young communist, I would be trying to build youthful reinvigoration of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which would include doing things and proposing ideas and questions that are not familiar to the leadership because of the generational distinction. So there must be a generational dialogue, I think, within that party. But here's where I would have the most fervent warning. I have noticed as a general trend among the youth of almost every country in the world that there has been an Americanization because of the internet, because of the emergence of the American internet and especially American social media platforms. The same pathology of the wokeness, the same pathology of the kind of fanaticism and infantilism and all this kind of eclectic trends. I know they're very prominent on the Russian left, but it's all across the world, right? So we are all, in a sense, on the same boat. We, as the youth, must carry forward forward the torch of the previous generation while adapting it to the new conditions. So we cannot fall into the trap of the kind of color revolution, youthful wokeism and extremism and so on and so forth, which is it's an ancient kind of problem of how the youth becomes the adult, how to carry forward the tradition of the past, how to honor the memory of the forefathers. So I think the Russian youth, communist youth, have the privilege of having probably, if not the most, among the most important, I would say the most important communist traditions in the world. So it's also important to, in a sense, be conservative because you have a lot. For example, in the United States, we have no real effective communist tradition, right? We have no explicitly forefather to avenge here, right? So, it's the difficult problem is there's no longer an ability to respect form, right? Because we're on the internet, we're all talking to each other. So we have this feeling that we're part of this one worldwide political party, right? Facebook and Twitter is the political party. It's all one party where we all discuss and what actions should we do. And then all these groups form based on their own opinion of what actions to do. And they call this a party. That's not a party. A party is a protocol, a formal organization, an exclusive protocol, meaning a party recognizes a distinction between the private opinion and discourse and the public position. It's that elementary distinction that founds the formal party organization. We need to adapt that to the information age. And it's a difficult task, but I think part of that will have to be operating within traditional communist parties. We never changed in our understanding that the CPUSA are a bunch of clowns. The leadership are foolish and they whatever, but it's the form of the party that mattered to us.
The last one is about one little country called DPRK. Your opinions, your thoughts on how they function?
The extent of my knowledge is not very great. I have deep respect for the people of the DPRK and the state of the DPRK in general for their resilience and their militancy and so on of defending their state amidst unbeatable odds, basically. But internally, I can't speak much on how much this is a model for other countries rather than the uniquely Korean traditions. I myself think China's system represents the most advanced contemporary form of socialism. But whether that system is applicable within the context of the DPRK, it's not for me to decide, right?
I can say one obvious thing that, well, they cannot, apply openness reforms just because they are not the ones who closed themselves,
Precisely. Yes, that's true as well. And I think China, to me, provides an interesting example of materialist kind of economic openness while maintaining the political closeness. I think that
political and cultural autonomy, great cultural autonomy.
Precisely. I think my position is that we have not correctly finished the study of Marxism-Leninism anywhere in the world. Like, we must really go back and evaluate what was the significance of the Sino-Soviet split. Because as we can see, China exists today, the Soviet Union doesn't. And I think there was a crucial split within the world communism that deserves more examination of beyond the surface, more critical examination. Many people reduce it to geopolitical differences, or even worse, the civilizational differences. The truth is that the Chinese mounted a very specific critique of the Soviet-style bureaucracy and kind of whole technical planning scientific paradigm that I think deserves more, even down to basic differences of revolutionary strategy. This famous disagreement between Mao and Stalin about the peasantry, right? In an era where the traditional proletariat is rapidly changing in its form, and if not changing, also breaking down because of automation and technology, we must ask the question implicitly posed by Mao: what really is the proletariat? Is the proletariat just a specific kind of sociological, industrial phenomena in the 19th century. Is the proletariat just a definition from Engels's Principles of Communism from 1847 of anyone who doesn't own means of production? I mean, that's not applicable. Even CEOs don't always own the means of production, right? So we should really open back up the study of Marxism-Leninism as a unique contribution to Marxism. And not to ramble, but I just want to make this point because I think it's very important. The history of Marxism-Leninism is defined by attempts to re-assimilate Lenin's unique discovery back into some kind of orthodox Marxism, right? And the Mao's critique of Stalin implicitly was that Stalin did this toward the end of his life, right? He tried to fit Lenin's unique discovery back into the old orthodox Marxism. And Mao said, no, there's more to this discovery by Lenin. There's more significance we need to explore. It has more implications. It's not just, for example, why did the Russian Revolution happen in Russia, not the advanced capitalist West? Is it because of an accident? Is it because of a fluke? It was not an exceptional circumstance, because all communist revolutions happen in the non-advanced countries. So we need to derive
outside the imperial core, I would say, yeah.
Yes, precisely. So we need to derive a deeper significance of this that changes the foundations of what we understand Marxism to be right now. And part of this has to do with things as basic as time. Gramsci's idea of hegemony here is very interesting, because the October Revolution, although the economic preconditions of the revolution didn't yet exist, advanced industrial proletariat or so on and so forth, they seized upon the state power and thereby kind of acquired proving the relative autonomy of the superstructure with regard to the economic base, right? Gramsci just took this a step further and said the same thing with culture. Even when you don't seize the state power, even when you don't have the economic preconditions, there is a relative autonomy of the culture, of the institutional hegemony with regard to the base. So that logic to me proves that the basic structure of causality implicit in dialectical materialism has been misunderstood by Marxists for over 100 years now. Like,
maybe.
Yeah, it's like it's not that first you have the correct preconditions, then it gives rise to
it's
the
just,
effect.
It's philosophical misunderstanding of what dialectical unity is. That unlike in formal logic, in dialectics, causal relationship is two-sided. It's always two-sided. Precisely. So, but that also applies to revolutionary strategy. That also applies to how to win the masses, how to gain power. How does an ordinary Marxist who wants to be faithful to the mission of communism, how do they proceed? What is to be done, right? We should rethink our assumptions about the successive order of causality here, right? From the dissemination of consciousness, many people just assume we must just go on the street and yell at people or distribute newspapers, and so there's much to rethink when it comes to the basics, I would say. Yeah, sure. I hope we would have enough time to do that before this world ends. Yeah,
that's another problem. But who knows, maybe to be optimistic, after 90% of the world is wiped off, we can build communism post-apocalyptically. Then we can have the
glory to both of us.
Yeah.
Anyways. Okay, so speaking of culture, so it's a statement by one of our comrades who says that modern mainstream culture is based on anti-radicalism, basically on this idea of anything but extremes. And he illustrates this with some movies and whatnot, and yeah, sure. But
Oh, sorry, continue.
Well, I mean, on the other hand, we have a lot of, young adult movies romanticizing the revolution and the struggle and whatnot. So, where do you think the current cultural agenda actually lies, and where are the minds of the people?
So, just to speak within the American context, because I am aware within Russia, I am some vaguely familiar with the main stance being against extremism by the government. Most of its rhetoric is just against extremism, and Putin is this kind of centrist and so on.
Yeah, sure.
But just speaking for America, we should distinguish culture with regard to culture and the way culture depicts politics. So when it comes to how culture depicts politics in movies and in TV shows, yes, it's the basic Karl Popper, basic kind of don't go too extreme or you'll end up the opposite. Like, for example, the horseshoe theory, if you're familiar with this. Yeah. And then also all of the young adult fiction. This is very curiously, this is what needs to be emphasized, right? All of the young adult fiction, of course, romanticizes the revolutionary. Of course, if you play video games today, it romanticizes the most revolutionary you can think of, superhuman abilities and blowing up the police, tearing down cities and killing all the soldiers, everything, killing the president. That's basically standard for today's ideology. But what they will never be able to depict romantically is what happens after you seize the power. That's when the propaganda begins, because the real revolutionary, this is my drawing from the Carl Schmitt and the kind of German Prussian tradition. What's really revolutionary is not the process of destruction. What's really revolutionary is the maintenance of the sovereignty, holding the sovereignty. So even when you're not a state, if you are a party that can hold your ground and act in a sovereign, independent, and effective way, that is much more revolutionary than causing chaos and destruction. Revolutionary order, that's what the partisan represents, the guerrilla fighter. The guerrilla fighter is a specific type of revolutionary that situates themselves in a non-standard direction of order, right? Within the countryside, among the peasants, there's an order and a rhyme and a logic to this, right? So that's the real revolutionary stance, is power, holding power, relating to power, being responsible for it. That is the beginning of the distinction between the individual, which is all the bourgeoisie cares about, is the individual. That's why they romanticize the revolutionary, because that kind of revolutionary is just an adolescent individual throwing a tantrum. The party form, the political form, represents and marks the distinction from the individual to a collective subjectivity, to a supra-individual collective form of power that the bourgeois consciousness cannot articulate. It can only confuse it for some kind of tyranny or dictatorship or totalitarianism, so on and so forth. So there must be a willingness for the individual to seize upon their place within a higher collective order, a higher civilization, country, nation, people, class. For example, in the case of the Donetsk People's Republic, their individuals were called upon, regardless of your opinion, your ideology, and so on, to accept their place within a bigger people, the Donetsk people, for example, or for some, the Russian people, and so on and so on. So to me, that today is the revolutionary stance, basically. But I will say, with regard to culture with regard to culture, extremism, at least in America, is the norm, right? Being the most abnormal and extreme in defying norms is what is romanticized. It's not only romanticized, it's become banal, right? It's become routine. It's the latest fashion. I mean, the latest Apple iPhone commercial says this is the revolutionary. This will change everything, right? So that is a kind of permanent extremism, especially the LGBT movement and so on. So,
well, for me, it's just draining all the sense and all the message of being revolutionary from being revolutionary. I mean, if you say for the smallest advance of technology that it would change everything, then it just means that nothing will change nothing.
I mean, people must understand that if modern progressive capitalism is revolutionary, its basic orientation is change. The ideology of change for its own sake is a conservative ideology. It's not a revolutionary ideology. To be a revolutionary is when you stand your ground and you say no, right? When you resist the wind of change, that's when you really change things, you know?
Okay. Okay, then some questions about your interactions with different organizations. So, what is actually the state of, let's say more traditional trade union movement in the US? Because we know pretty much nothing about it.
We have institutional trade unions, and those are part of the Democratic Party's hegemony. The institutional trade unions are like mega corporations. They've existed for a very long time, and it's just a way to institutionalize loyalty to the Democratic Party. So there's been no successful new trade union developments, with a notable exception, which was the Amazon trade union. It was one of the first, probably most successful union movement or struggle in, at least decades, right? But if you look at what's happening to the Amazon labor union, it immediately got absorbed by the hegemony. The guy, Chris Smalls, who organized it, he immediately got to meet with the president, Joe Biden. He got to meet with the whole U.S. government, and he's basically became a celebrity. And
okay, so basically they try to exercise their control in a soft way over him. Yeah. Okay.
I think it probably will happen if it hasn't already. I don't know, but there is no union movement. It's just an attempt to replicate the paradigm of the past, and it has a completely different meaning in the contemporary context. Like today in the United States, there's a attempt to unionize baristas, Starbucks baristas.
Okay.
And that's the that's the major union movement that the left is fighting for right now. Like if you ask a American leftist, or if you ask the Communist Party, where's the union movement right now? They say, oh yeah, Starbucks. That's where the workers' movement is.
If the worker is an easily replaceable, if you need 16 hours to train someone for a job, it's probably not a good place to start a trade union.
Well, see, the problem is trade union consciousness in the past was a stepping stone to political consciousness, right? But I think all of our societies have already become politicized. Everyone, whatever institution they're a part of, even their workplace, is politicized after the age of imperialism. So I think we don't need to go through anymore the stage of a trade union movement. We can just seize upon, probably. We might have to participate, of course, in some trade unions, especially ones that are discontented with the hegemony, and win them over to our organizations. But I don't think communists should necessarily, right now, right at this stage, depends on the organization, of course. If you're trying to build a communist organization, the first thing you have to get into order is media. You have to get your message and become a functioning collective organism that won't split into a million pieces and can competently regulate the behavior of its members, directing which actions to engage in, controlling its PR, controlling its political line, managing and regulating the messages it's getting across. Once you get that and you grow, then you can embark upon unionization as a strategy, or you can embark upon electoral things as a strategy. There's many different things you can do tactically.
Well, electoral unionizing, just engaging in community protests or community actions.
Very important. But you need to first be an effective collective organism first. Okay. And then once you can decide what kind of things you want to do based on the context. But I see many, for example, leftists who say, I'm going to build communism from the Starbucks baristas. And it's just a refusal to accept that you cannot build an effective collective organism. And why do I say this? Because why are communists in America going to Starbucks baristas? And why are Starbucks baristas unionizing more than anyone else? Because Starbucks baristas are more likely to be petty bourgeois intelligentsia. They're more likely to be people who adopt communist consciousness because they share similar sociological backgrounds as the actual communists. So what communists are doing is, instead of going to the masses outside of their bubble, they're just going to the people who are already similar to them, right? right? And the only way you can reach people outside of your bubble is to build an organization whose form is not reducible to your particular background and characteristics. Only then can you actually reach people outside. It seems paradoxical, right? How to actually leave your bubble is to actually build an effective bubble. Then you will have more freedom to move it here, move it there. But right now, everyone's stuck in a bubble they cannot even recognize or take responsibility for.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, if you have a party that can support some of its, activists.
Precisely.
Well, yeah. I mean, support them in, let's say you want to reach to some, I don't know. Well, let's say minors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then your party has to have the means to support your maybe to support actual minors if they need something from you, or to support some of your guys to, just go there and basically indulge with this, basically live there. I mean, the thing is, it's very hard to, spread your message to propagandize from the outside, always.
Yeah.
It's always really hard. So basically, well, what we thought about it is you have to be somewhat inside, but to have to be somewhat inside, basically your organization has to have the means to put you inside.
Yeah, precisely.
And
No, that's what's true for the Bolsheviks as well. Like Stalin worked in factories only to organize them and cause trouble and so on. So that's it's true. What you're saying is true. But I think the information age and the age of internet has changed a lot. People are not only organized any longer at the local. It's still true vestigially, but the direction society's headed in seems to be non-local organization.
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably, but to the very least, you have to find the, points of contact. Basically, if it's not the workplace, it may be your hobby or your, I don't know, even I don't know, a sports team fan club.
Yeah, it's it has to be points of contact in the vicinity of each communist. But I think what's interesting about the internet is communists can, if we think of communism like a virus, like COVID-19, in a bad way, I guess, it can spread like a virus because of the internet. You can have someone here, someone there, and they can be spreading it within their local vicinity without having to go to one club every day to go to the Congress and so on.
In one hand, it's true. In another hand, the internet actually forms some sort of immunity to spreading of any kinds of ideas, basically creating those echo chambers and whatnot. In dialectics, it's fucking always. Anyways, so Haz, do you and your organization have any particular international connections? Guys are interested about Europe, all parts of Europe, but in particular Greece and Germany for whatever reason.
So once we get the organization officially announced and going, of course, want to cultivate as many international connections as possible. In regards to Greece, I think we are somewhat very opposed to the Greek Communist Party because we think I think the Greek Communist Party is the hegemon of the Western communism, paradoxically. Although they had the principled stance of rejecting the gay marriage bill in Greece, showing they're not completely co-opted. Of course, they oppose NATO, at least officially, in a very aggressive way. They provided the theoretical foundation for the opportunistic position in America and in Western Europe for claiming that people in Donetsk, for example, resisting the Ukrainians and NATO were Nazis. Sorry, not Nazis, were imperialists.
Well, at least they were just blind tools of evil Russian imperialism.
Precisely. So the Communist Party of Greece provided the theoretical foundation for rejection of multipolarity. And I think multipolarity is a very important new context for Marxism-Leninism. Most of the newer generation generation of young Marxist-Leninists in the West, at least, are unipolar ideologists. They just want to, they think that they can somehow influence American unipolarity to be communist, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Like they say, we should be attacking this country for communism, basically, for Marxism-Leninism. It's like a Trotskyite perversion. The fundamental significance of multipolarity, which says that regardless of ideology, there must be an understanding that, at least for now, there are different lines and paths of development according to different peoples. That has no currency among these communists, and that's thanks to the Greek Communist Party, in my view, because they basically have projected this bipolar or unipolar ideological viewpoint that, it's just an imperialist war, we're the only principled ones, both sides are bad. It's not an inter-imperialist war, because America is not a particular polarity. We are trying to pursue American polarity. America is a unipole, meaning it's one domination of the globe by one hegemony, right? So Russia fighting that hegemony is not inter-imperialist, because multipolarity is about the coexistence of different polarities. It's not about the dominance of one. The whole point is there has to be a recognition there are different polarities and different lines of development.
Yeah.
So, and how this works in the American context is so convenient, because we are the Maga communists, which means our idea is that we must have a communism in the American context, meaning the only way Americans can fight the imperialism is by focusing on the American particularity against the universalism, like American people versus American unipolarity, American nation against the global homogeneity of America, right? So they say, no, you can't do this. This is fascism. We must give America back to the indigenous tribes in their reservations. And then we said, we think it's unjust how the indigenous people were treated and are treated now. And we think a better deal should arise for autonomy and so on for them. But how can you say your position in America is everything in America should go to the indigenous tribes? All the American workers, all the American people are settlers. All the white people are evil. All the white people are colonists. And we need to be ruled by the indigenous people. And the American workers should know their privilege. If you're a straight, white, cisgender male, you are also an oppressor, just like the bourgeoisie. You're not. You are also oppressed because you're a worker, but you are a worker who's privileged because you're white, cis, straight, male, and cisgender. So you should have an apologetic. It's like that's their position, and that's the result of a rejection of multipolarity, because the way they see it, it's like they claim to oppose America and American imperialism, but their mentality and their ideology is still a unipolar one, which is this kind of rejection of the particularity of civilizations in favor of a universal ideology. They don't want to accept America as a particular civilization. They just have this globalist ideological stance, which they also want to apply to the American people.
Okay. Well, I mean, on these whites, cis, whatever, I never chose to be white to begin with.
I mean, it's they say our position was very reasonable. We are called fascists. We said, look, indigenous, and I don't know what they are, 1 to 5% of the population. I said, I'm sorry, but 95% of people cannot be ruled by 5%. Your position is bizarre, it's untenable, it's impractical, never going to happen, and it's just based on some abstract morality. And they said, you're a chauvinist, you're genocidal, you're fascist. They came up with a word called PATSOC. You ever heard this term, PATSOC? It's called patriotic socialism. They said, you are the patriotic socialists, the PATSOCs, because you're patriotic for your country. And we said, listen, this is standard Marxism-Leninism. Every communist party, historically, anywhere in the world, at least after World War II, right? Patriotism was part of its official position. That's a standard position. And they said, no, only the Indians can be patriotic. Only black people can be patriotic. And then they said only the oppressed can be patriotic. patriotic. And I said, no, the Germans in the DDR,
they were real patriots.
Yeah, and Germany was an oppressor nation. Germany was tried to enslave the world, but still, when the communists, both while they were fighting the Nazis and after they took power, still said, we are fighting for the German people and our German country and our homeland, and they were patriotic. So we tried to explain this to them, and they said, no, you're like a national socialist. You're like the Nazis.
Okay.
And they said the real communism is only patriotism for the oppressed, and we white people will take a knee and bow ourselves to the oppressed transgender black woman. And she, I don't know. So that is why I am a controversial figure in the American left.
Okay.
It's not because my critique of LGBT. It's not because anything. That's how it started. We tried to be very reasonable and say patriotism is a basic tenet of Marxism-Leninism. Orthodox, normal, traditional Marxism-Leninism. They said no. They said that's chauvinistic. And then that ostracized me from 99% of not only the American left, but the international left online that speaks English.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, my greetings in the beginning was our internal joke, but yeah, among the Russian left, our, content production group, whatever you call this media group, it was unironically called a far-right Marxist group. And yeah, we were proud to take this, this slur and to incorporate it in our, motto, because yeah, sure. We look at you who identify as the left, and yeah, looking at you, we are far right. Okay, goodbye.
No, it's so tragical because historically this was not the left. Che Guevara was not a transgender disabled black woman with indigenous roots.
Yeah, sure.
Che Guevara was a very masculine, figure. That was the connotation of leftism for most of history. Now that's all associated with being part of the far right, owing purely to America's unipolar hegemony. People have forgotten. See, when the Soviet Union had an alternative hegemony, that's why there was an alternative real left. After the Soviet Union is dissolved, the so-called left just totally gets absorbed by the American empire. And that's why even in Russia where you live, it's so tragic. You are considered far right, even though you are far more faithful to the actual indigenous communist tradition in your country. And they are kind of importing this foreign perversion.
Yeah, and basically one thing I wanted to state that just came to my mind is, all that intersectionist, the oppressed and whatnot. Guys, we, the left, are not the oppressed. We, guys, are the fighting.
Yes.
So we are not whining that we are oppressed.
Precisely. Victims.
We are not victims. We are fighters.
Precisely. That's why I like to adopt this term, the partisan, as a new kind of political polarization. Like, it's the partisan versus the hegemony. The partisan is the left wing, but the new form of the left wing, right? The partisan, the fighter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just compare Rosalia Zemlyachka, the commissar in Crimea in this Russian civil war, and modern feminist pink-headed. She can just tell me.
It's so curious. In America, I kid you not, they will try and say that the Red Army fighting the Nazis would have been pro-LGBT, pro-transgender. And I said, how can they have won a war? How can you win a war? How can you go on a battlefield and fight when you're this sensitive and politically correct about all these stupid you think this feminist pink, and they said, but women fought. Yeah, women fought in the war, but they had to assume a masculine role, which was toughness, perseverance, strength. They didn't do so as victims. And
basically, what is even more important, some of the women women, and I would say most of the women who fought in the Red Army during the Great Patriotic War, actually tried to escape this masculinity on every occasion they could. So, there were a lot of, social events on the calmer periods of the front, like dances and whatnot. Guys, those girls with rifles just try to dress up and come up as girls.
Yeah.
Why? Well, it's not because they were pro-patriarchy or whatever. No, it was just because it was their, way of living. And for them, their masculine role they took was unnatural. They wanted to revert it.
Yes.
They wanted a resemblance of, normality.
Yes. But most importantly, there was no tolerance of men who acted feminine.
Yeah, sure.
No tolerance of that. You cannot.
Oh, those were slandered all over.
If
you read, the newspapers, they were like harsh, satiric, texts about those who act, those men who act like, girl and is not willing to fight or to, fulfill his role. Yeah, because
it's so disgusting because did you know American leftists have an impression that the Soviet Union was a woke civilization because that's what they're being told by these liars who say, oh, the Soviets they were gays and they were all this. They're trying to say it was a woke empire, and we really need, what we need translations that we can show them from Soviet Union where they acknowledge natural differences of man and woman, that there's a natural woman, there's a natural man, there's no how should I say, acceptance of the effeminate male, feminization of men, and so on. Men have to be masculine in the Soviet Union.
Equality doesn't mean uniformity.
Precisely. Equality meant both roles were respected equally, not just try to make them exactly the same.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it was not, from the... Basically, again, yes, traditional gender roles in the Soviet Union suffered a lot during and after the war, but it was not the intention, it was the consequence, basically. Yeah. The country lost 20-something million lives, mostly men. Yeah. Guess what? Some of the women had to take the other role.
Right. But the important thing is men are never taking the feminine role.
At least
that's the norm in the West. The norm in the West is that men are toxic and need to be more feminine and wear dresses and so on and so forth.
Okay. By the way, one joke I remembered. Your Maga communism.
Yeah.
For me, it sounds hilarious because for me, Maga is a shortening of a name Muhammad. So for me, Maga communism is, resembling those Dagestani freestyle wrestlers in Soviet Union flags.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think you didn't, but just some humor. Okay, and now let's go through less serious questions. Do you have any contacts in Russia besides us?
I do. Very early on in the Infrared show, we did interview someone who I believe was from Donbass, and they claimed to be from the Donbass Antifa, anti-fascist. And this was in 2020, I believe, in 2020. And we opened contacts with them. We did an interview for an organization at the same time. I think it was, I don't know the official name, but it seemed to be a part of them. And then just recently, I did an interview for the Russian, I think it's called the Soviet Communist Workers' Party. Are you familiar? Yeah. I did an interview for them. Yeah. We did an interview for them. And we also have individual contacts contacts, not officially representing organizations, but that's really the extent of.
Okay. I hope we would figure out something productive.
Yeah. We should really collaborate on defeating the woke virus.
Oh, yeah.
Respectively.
Oh, yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, yeah, that is answered already. Okay, what kind of beer do you like the most?
Beer. So
I've said less serious questions.
So I have to keep it halal, but I was not always so pious when I was younger. So I have used to drink beer basically. I will say before I think my favorite was I think it was actually a Croatian or a Hungarian. I forget what it was called. Duval. You heard of Duval?
Never. It is not imported here.
Oh, yeah, that one was my favorite. Basically, yeah, I forgot the rest. I've been sober.
Okay.
For years.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
And here we have a cult following of Czech and German beers. I guess it has to do with the Eastern Bloc history.
Yeah.
Basically, Czechoslovakia and East German beer was imported into Soviet Union, so we still have this cult of those beer traditions.
I used to like beer. I can't drink anymore. It's a shame. I used to enjoy it.
I mean, you can use an excuse of Amar Hayam.
Yeah.
Well, then some personalities. Anyways, what? By the way, do you know any? Not you in particular, but are any of the Russian communists actually known to the Western audience?
No.
Okay, that's the answer we needed. Okay. And I guess the last one would be, do you plan your merchandise to be shipped to Russia?
If I can, I will, yes. If it's whatever I can do to make it possible. I'll have to look into that. I don't know if it will be, because I'm importing from China, so maybe there can be a way for me to have it shipped from China to there.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a way for your merchandise to be shipped from China to Russia. I don't know if it is the way for you to get money from it.
It's mainly, I want to break even. Like, I want the cost to be paid for, basically. Profit from merchandise is not the primary way I plan on making money.
I mean, if you can position your merchandise on AliExpress, then we would definitely figure something out.
Yeah. I'll definitely be looking into it. I'm still getting my samples shipped to me. They should be here in a week or so.
Okay. Oh, and I guess the last question, I just missed one more serious one. So, what in particular do you mean by small government when you are talking to the American audience?
I think by small government, I mean, for example, did you know in China, the central government only accounts for about 15% of the government spending, meaning local governments account for far more. It's a much more efficient kind of decentralized system, and just in regards to how government state expenditures. So that's one example. Another example is, I think I agree with the historian Grover Furr that Stalin wanted to increase the Soviet democracy at the expense of the party bureaucracy toward the end of his life. He wanted to make the party basically into a spiritual, moral guiding force and strengthen this institution of Soviet democracy. And then we see with Mao an attempt to kind of fight the bureaucracy with his Red Guards and so on. So I think small government has always been a goal for communists. We want a strong government, but we want as much local sovereignty, local self-organization and so on. We want the government to be kept to a bare minimum. We don't want to expand it at every turn. We want to keep it to what it needs to be at the bare minimum and leave the rest to the socialist civil society. Stalin, for example, example, did not want, I think this is my historical understanding, he pushed back against the view in the economic problems in the USSR that the kolkhozes should simply be turned into the sovkhozes.
Yeah.
He said we should also try to strengthen this kind of collective farm, not just turn it into a state institution. So I think there must be a form of collective solidarity in the society, but the small government basically just means we have a government that wants to do less, not more, as its basic operating principle. The operating principle is not to try and just expand itself at all costs and intervene in the minutiae of people's lives, but leave the most as possible to the free self-development of the people.
Okay, so it's all about distribution of power and resources, and yes, in this society. Okay, yeah, that's now clear. And thank you for being with us. Thank you for the interview. It was a pleasure. Do you have any last words for our listeners and viewers?
Not presently, no. Thank you so much for having me on for interview. I appreciate it, and I look forward to further collaboration.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have any ideas, just contact us at any time. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.